Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited. My name is Alexis de Jesus. I am the events director for Tequeria, and I wanted to welcome you all to Conversaciones con Asana. We have an amazing partnership with Asana, and they are one of the best in the league, one of the best platforms for team management, communication, organization. And we're really excited today because we do have a really strong focus on strategic leadership, team flow, and stability. And we all know that that's super, super important, especially in today's hybrid role, hybrid positions, everything. Our companies are constantly changing. So there's a lot of focal points that we're going to be hitting today. So for right now, I'm going to pass it on to Danielle James, and she has been an amazing, amazing person to work with at Asana. And she's going to kick it off and tell us more about Asana and definitely more about Steve Morin, head of mobile engineering at Asana. So Danielle, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, Alexis. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. I'm loving seeing where everyone is from. Johnny, I see you. Brooklyn is my hometown, even though I'm in Atlanta visiting my grandma right now. I see people from San Jose. Lots of people from California. Ooh, Fatima, Harlem. That's where I live right now. So very fond. Thank you all for joining us today. As Alexis mentioned, my name is Danielle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a part of Team Asana. And I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. Asana is a proud member of the Tequeria community, both as individual members and as a company. And it's just always great when we get to connect in person, even if it's virtual like today. As Alexis mentioned, today we are here with Steve, who leads mobile engineering at Asana. And actually, first of all, who here is familiar with Asana? Let me know in the chat if you've used Asana before. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Asana, Asana is a work management platform. And we really just aim to make teams productive and make them do their best work by removing distractions and making it seamless to advance projects and be aligned and have clarity around your goals and the work you're driving forward. Oh, hey, yes, Tequeria uses Asana. It's always good to hear. So Steve is going to discuss team design today, and he's really going to share insights on how to design a productive team. So a lot of times when you grow into a leadership role, sometimes we can be thrown into the role of a manager, and we don't always have the right resources, depending on the company where we work, to understand how we can actually be intentional about designing a productive team. And sometimes we also don't have the opportunity, right? Sometimes we inherit a team, or we might have the opportunity to design a new team from scratch. So Steve is going to share all of his knowledge on team design, and he's going to focus on engineering team. But I know I'll be taking notes because I think this applies to just teams across the board. And then after Steve shares his knowledge, you'll be able to ask questions in Q&A, and then we will form small group breakout sessions where we'll get to connect with one another, continue to share resources and ask questions, and discuss the topic a little bit deeper. So again, Team Asana is happy to be here with you all today. And with that, I will pass the mic to Steve.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Morin. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in Queens, New York myself. I live in San Francisco now. And a little bit about me. So I do love my pizza and bagels. I'm a Colombian American is my background. I don't have an accent much from New York or anywhere. My mom was in news for a long time, so I got a generic American accent from it. Welcome and thank you. A little bit of my background. I've been in a number of leadership roles over the years. I've been in a lot of startups. I've been a founder myself, have raised money on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto. I've sold companies. I've been CTO of companies and currently am head of mobile engineering here at Asana. I've also been at Instagram, at AT&T, and Yahoo. So I've seen some diversity in different management philosophies and style companies. So today, I'm going to talk about a topic I think is very important for day-to-day, but not it touches everyone day-to-day, and that's strategic leadership. Giving your teams flow through stability. And I think this is something I don't hear talked about a lot, but how your team is shaped and how it runs really affects people every day, right? And I think that I've seen leaders more focused on headcount and, what can we get done than building the team and the questions you put behind them. So what I wanted to go through is, I think, some of the basics when you're thinking about a team of how to build it, what questions you should be asking, and the reasons why, right? It affects everyone's sort of day to day. When you're basically not worried about what's next, you can do your best work. And that applies to a lot of people at all levels in an organization, whether you're a leader, a manager, an individual contributor. And I think it's important for people to remember, right? And so the net effect of when you're not worried about what's next, it's really reducing stress. It's allowing you to execute. And people don't like to stay in unstable environments. It's usually a very uncomfortable place to be, sort of broadly speaking. So I guess the first question I have in sort of identifying sort of with this topic and what it means to be on a team that is stable or unstable is, how do you feel when things aren't clear? And so, how do you feel when, your project or roadmap might be canceled or changed? You don't know if you have enough scope to meet expectations. Like, how do you feel when you don't know if you'll have to find a new team? Even if you'll have a job, you're just like, I don't know what team I'm going to be on, whether it matches the things I'm interested in just because I'm taking a job. Whether you still have the same career advancement opportunities, or you sort of are forced into a reset. Like, none of these things are comfortable places to be, at least for me. I've seen a number of these things in my career. And I would ask everyone else, like, put in the chat, like, how do these things make you feel? And I guess maybe I'll ask, if anyone feels like they've been in any of these situations and want to talk about it. Well, it's okay. It's not a comfortable place to be. I know I've had jobs where I haven't been able to see more than a month at a time, and it is really distracting. On the flip side, I'd say, and if you identify with any of these things, I'd say, like, love to hear how you feel, like, in the chat is, how do you feel in contrast, like, when your project and roadmap won't be changed? Like, you have high confidence it's just going to be in place. You have enough scope to meet expectations, and your performance is not going to be in jeopardy. Like, you don't have to find a new team, so you can just focus on what you're doing today. When you can have a job as long as you want it, and that you have possibilities to advance in your career. I think for a lot of people, it's a very different feeling. I know for me, when I'm not worried about the future, I'm focused on what I'm doing today. And that's a very big thing, at least for me. And I hope a lot of others identify with that as well. So, part of the talk today, what are we going to do? We're going to have a little interactive exercise. We're going to go through different teams, and there's going to be a multiple choice here for folks. There's going to be polls that'll go out and really asking, like, based on a prompt, what team would you propose? And I have here some of the abbreviations we use in some of the slides. So EM is for engineering manager, TL is for tech lead, SWE or SWE is software engineer, FE is front end, BE is back end. So let's hop into this. So the first prompt, you're a team's manager. Which is the right way to build your software engineering team? So everyone will get a poll in just about a moment. Answer A, B, or C. And if you have an opinion why you picked a letter, I would say put it in the chat. And even if you don't want to speak up, I will love to see people's reasonings of why they've picked what they have. All right, answers are coming in. We'll just give it another moment. All right, we'll share the results. Is that being shared right now? It says it's being shared. All right, great. Doesn't tell me that, so 5 people see the results. Well, in first place, we have A from the poll. Last place is B, and looks just about, oh, maybe it's a tie between A and C. So this is what people picked for results, and let's see what the answer is. The answer is B. Basically, if you take a step back and you're not just picking a team with a super highlight, and you ask the question, what is the mission of a team? And if a mission happens to be maintain the stability and scalability of a server infrastructure, you're looking at a very different team, right? So it's not the classic team maybe a lot of people think of when you think of product engineering teams, right? You probably have a manager, or you probably have some mix, depending on scope and size, of DevOps folks to actually manage that. And so I think this is what starts to go that like not all teams are shaped and look the same, even though we sometimes have stereotypes, of what we think a team should look like. Let's get to the next prompt. You're the team's manager for a product engineering team. What is the right way to build your software engineering team? And we have another poll going out. Let us see what people say. All right, we'll wait here just for a few more results and then share in just about a moment. All right, I'll call last call in the poll. 3, 2, 1, and I will share the results. All right, so most people chose, in this case, A. We have second most results for B and C. So let's see what answer we have here. So if we ask the last 2 questions and a new one, what skills and experience does the team need? If the mission is a mobile design systems team, and you ask what skills and experience you need, which is more senior mobile client engineers, it leads you to a different looking team. In this case, people guessed correctly. They picked the shape of a team that looks like a core mobile team, And so I think these are sort of the shape of questions you really need to be asking and hope that people think about. And we'll move on to the next one. You're a team's manager for an infrastructure privacy engineering team. What is the right way to build your software engineering team? Is there any thoughts? Feel free to put them in the chat. All right, and closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and ending the poll. So share the results. I think the most common answer here is C. Is this a popular one? Let's go see if we ask the right questions, what might we get? If we had another question, what is the duration of a team? And so if you have a mission to bring a company to compliance with the new privacy law, and then you say from that, the skills you need are and senior engineers with data and privacy experience, and you sort of look at the project to bring to compliance looks to be a few months, this really looks like a potentially very different answer. You don't necessarily need a dedicated engineering manager for an ad hoc team. C is actually a pretty good guess as well. It could be a shape of a team. Obviously, people need actual managers, but you don't need a dedicated one. So these people have managers, but then there's a discussion of how do you make this team exist if you have a special project? This is a question I think a lot of people don't ask, and I think a lot of companies do make is less obvious than the first two questions, because I find a lot of companies in my past have created teams that are maybe solving a problem and they don't ask questions like this. And so you create a team and then the team gets demolished in 6 or 8 months later. And then people that are on the team ask themselves like, well, now I've stepped up for something that needed to get done. And then do I have a job? And now I take the penalty to like look for a new job within the company or something like that. And if you answer this ahead of time as a leader in the company or a manager, you could have put an ad hoc team where everyone keeps their old job on their old teams. And you're going to be on loan for 4 to 6 months. And there's no question. And everyone goes back to where it was. The teams get the stability. And so it's important to ask questions like this because then you can do a lot of advanced planning. In particular, the first two questions might be a bit more obvious, but this one is less so. And I think this is a place I've seen a lot of organizations make mistakes. And we'll go to the next question. So you're your team's manager for a product infrastructure engineering team. What's the right way to build your software engineering team? I think you can see a theme here. We're asking various questions, and we're on our last question of this will be one of 4 as this one goes together. Yeah, this one will go into chat if you want to feel like answering. I'll give people another few seconds if people want to put this in the chat. Running a lot of A's here, a couple B's. C, assuming it's a front-end infrastructure team. I think that's a good guess, actually. But we'll go to the answer here. Sort of the last classic question, and I think this is something a lot of leaders in engineering miss all the time and don't take ownership of really, is what are the cross-functional roles needed to support a team? I've seen this very common where if you're an engineering manager, an engineering director, you're focused on the headcount your group gets, you ask all your managers, hey, what is the career growth path of your teams? Is that taken care of? Do we are splitting the teams for efficiency? But I'll see even directors and other senior leaders not ask, do we have enough designers? Do we have enough PMs? Is the maturity of this team really stable? We have a mature design system, so we need very few designers per team. Do we have, for some reason, a high velocity team that needs 2 designers because we're rebuilding an entire experience? We're reskinning it, rebuilding the look and feel of that application. That's a very different set of experiences. And so, you know, in this hypothetical, it's some people guessed well that the obvious answer is usually the wrong one, right? You have a web design team, you know, so you want to look for a mix of front-end engineers. It's a long-term duration. You've answered that question, right? But in this case, you know, you need more design help than maybe your average product team. And I think what I want to give everyone the sense here is that, you know, this is just a short set of questions for everyone to ask, but there is more to ask and there's more to think about. And it's not just about headcount, it's just about another engineer or another designer, or if you're in a marketing team, another marketer. But really think about what's necessary to give people long-term stability and build good, strong teams. You might ask yourself, some people are not managers or leaders, or not yet. Maybe you want to be one day. Maybe you just want to be a senior IC for the rest of your career. So like, but I'm an IC. Keep your leaders accountable. You know, maybe you have a great leader that's already asking these questions, but they haven't shared it. You know, ask them. You know, ask your managers, ask your leaders, you know, what are these questions? Sometimes sometimes it's through no fault, like everyone. We're in the rush of day to day and you just forget things that you know better. And take the time to ask your leaders, because it might be like, oh, I should have thought of. So it's on everyone, just like we're all trying to watch each other's backs. We try to take care of one another. You know, even if you're an IC, whether you're junior or senior, ask this. If you're junior and they're doing it right, it may be just that you learn something new from your leaders and how they're thinking about the org, how they're thinking about the future of your team, right? Which is valuable in and of itself. And if they did have a miss, or you have a manager that maybe isn't asking the right questions, you may catch them and you may get them to rethink their strategy and ask new questions. So don't think this is just for leaders and managers. And that's today. I really wanted to like show everyone just a little bit of an entry point into asking the right questions will lead to future stable and happy teams, right? So, you know, it's important, just like everything else, to plan. Ask the right questions. Here's a couple, and it's really the beginning. I think some other questions that come up to me is, you know, what is the mentorship and career balance on your teams? What are the growth opportunities? What are the communication patterns? Some questions I don't see asked enough. Are missions of teams clear, so 2 teams are not bumping into each other all the time? So there's actually independence in the missions of teams. That might vary also if you're a startup and teams are really just grabbing at work from a giant backlog on a startup, which is very different than a mature company. So these questions start to change and morph depending on the maturity of the company you're in, depending on the industry you're in. There's also some norms that may exist. For example, gaming companies have studio models quite frequently, and their work often varies. So this is only some basics, maybe a thing or two that hopefully is maybe not obvious for you, but there's a lot of questions to ask, and this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. So I wanted to share with everyone here today, and hopefully this was enlightening. And with that, I know we have happy to answer questions if people want to pop it into the chat, or if you want to ask them live, more than happy to take that too, but I know that is less comfortable than the chat sometimes. So figure out what to ask.
How's it going, Steve?
Hi.
John Urhilas. Thanks for taking the time to walk us through this. Fully agree on the stability. I'm curious, stability is the one thing we anchor for. How do you make sure that you still are evolving the teams appropriately? The needs of the organization change over time. How do you keep a pulse on that? And answering the question is, do I have the right teams? And trying to balance that with keeping things stable.
I think different leaders have different methodologies. I'm a big fan of actually evolving teams quite slowly. you can't always do that. That's not actually all reality. To try to answer your question is, I usually, when I'm managing other managers, for instance, I usually try to keep them in the loop. And when I've managed teams directly, I try to keep my team members in the loop. I try to co-create with them. Can't always share everything, but what is shareable, I do talk through. So for instance, on an individual team, I may be getting some heads up from company leadership that, there's another area of product focus. I'll talk to the team about that we may be changing the focus of the team, and I'll let them know what I know. If I know where we're going, I'll say like they're looking in this direction, but things aren't finalized. If I'm looking at my managers, usually discuss what the team needs are. And then there's also practical conversations. And they can go in two senses, like, are we losing headcount? Are we getting headcount? What does that look like? And if we were to project a scenario in the future, what would be the trade-offs? So at Asana, for instance, mobile used to be in platform teams. And so got all the managers together, and they're all part of this with me, and we co-created, and we had a senior IC with us as well. And we talked about what different shapes we could take, how we could split up responsibilities to create missions of different teams, how long we think those missions would last, and did we have enough headcount to make each one of those teams healthy, with the mix of people. Other questions that I didn't bring up is redundancy. We didn't want iOS engineers or Android engineers to feel alone, like one person on a team. And so we're like, do we have a couple client engineers per team? We think community is important, and how do we augment that? So what we also built was, we have platform guilds. So there's an iOS guild, a mobile backend guild, a iOS guild. And so we provide multiple forms for community and like sort of touching base. And this is how I sort of think about building these mechanisms with your people. It's both to socialize, and you work with smart people, you might as well build it together.
I hadn't thought about the transparency is an important part of creating that stability. So it's a great point. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Based on your experience, we have a question in the chat. What is the best way to introduce agile spirit methodology to an engineering organization that is using waterfall for the release process? That's a good question. I will maybe answer that slightly differently than maybe most would. I think it's the nature of what waterfall means to your organization and what type of appetite the organization has. Some companies are in waterfall that don't want to be in it. And so that's something to consider. There's another thing to consider along with, are you building medical grade devices where people might die? Well, you might be more tied to waterfall at some level, but you probably can go within, certain smaller bounds to maybe a multi-sprint cycle, if you even have the concept of sprints, and to introduce it into smaller areas. And so I think depending on the constraints your company has, that will change. That's not super actionable. So I'll try to go something like a step further. I think it's really about socializing it and seeing what the constraints are, and not just what the constraints are from your viewpoint, but talking to other managers and other leaders and getting their feedback. Are they in favor of this? Because it needs more socialization. They just haven't been able to introduce it, versus everyone's in favor of it, but they don't know how to do it. No one's been trained in sprint, like in an agile sort of sprint methodology. And then it may be just as easy as like, can we get some budget, if it has, to like get two or three people trained in a workshop training to like bring those skills in house. So a lot of it's about working with other leaders and peers to develop what's your first step, and a step that will actually be adopted based on where your organization is today. So I was trying to get a feeling around those things. Did I answer your question? Any other questions?
Would it be okay if I just added on to that last question?
Yeah, feel free. This would be a dialogue, so hop right in.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you start small. Don't try to boil the ocean, rolling out agile across an org. Start small, pilot with a small team, and upfront just establish goals and objectives, so you can measure that in fact it's having the outcome that you need. And if you're getting the outcome that you need, you can advocate across the org and generate some enthusiasm about it. And so that's my quick 2 cents on that. Just start small, measure it, and then if successful, that'll help you roll it out across the org easier.
Thank you, Gil. If anyone else has a comment on that or anything else we've talked about, happy to have some people chime in. Like this to be more of a dialogue than a speech, I suppose. Looks like we don't have any additional questions. I don't know if we want to hop out. Oh. What are your recommendations to stay connected to engineering team that's offshore? And I need to bridge the gap with updates to management and customers. I will give you sort of, for me, I have my own thoughts on this. I think the first question is it really, are you treating a team as an isolated unit, or are you really bringing them into the team? And my personal opinion is anyone is either, I view them as either you say a team's a bunch of vendors and then you have a manager to manage the vendors and they do things off of the way you would almost from a software company. Otherwise, you bring them in-house. And I treat anyone who's offshore just like my team here. And then you just need to work on time zones. It's remote work. And it doesn't matter if it's in the same country, a different country. You need to figure out time zones and patterns that work for everyone, communication updates, how you handle stand-ups. And I think more than anything, even if they're not part of the same company, because they're maybe either independent contractors or they're outsourced through another firm, I always treat everyone just the way I treat any member of my team. And I think it's important to keep that framing and mindset. You don't create 2 classes of people in your team. You have a team, and treat them all that way. Treat them with respect, treat them with career growth, and bring them right in. So anything you do from your own team, separate discussion, in my opinion, is what tactics and things you need to set up to bridge time zones, to have communication patterns. But I think from the highest level spirit of it, they're your team. And if you're a good manager, you know how to treat a good team. And I actually keep it very similar. That's my personal take. Are there any good books you recommend, either management or software engineering? I do like Elegant Puzzle as a management book. I think it's not very linear, but if you're in management, it has like bits and pieces you can take almost as like chapters. And Making of a Manager, I think, is a good generic overview. So I sort of appreciate those. And I view, everyone has a slightly different take, and I view consuming multiple management books specific to management is a good thing. Programming books, I always view them very topical, so I don't have great recommendations that are generic programming books, because I think they're very language specific. Though I do like Paul Graham's take on Lisp. I've read his books if anyone's a Lisp fan.
Steve, one question around stability. I think now that I know Asana is doing hybrid model, some companies are sticking remote. Have you found that your techniques for remote have shifted in how you build stability for your teams? In both circumstances, both remote and or in the current hybrid model?
It's a good question. Asana in particular, I'd say is not me, though I agree with it. Asana is a pretty high bar for managers, and a lot of our managers are extremely empathetic. And so I think there's an extra importance for empathetic and people-oriented managers in a remote and hybrid environment, which you can sort of cheat on in a purely in-person environment and not have as much. So I think that is something, not a technique, but it's a commentary. And so if you're hiring other managers or trying to be a good manager, I think, and maybe you've not always been as in touch with your people, it becomes more so. Open a lot of conversations remote of like, how was your weekend? And what have you been doing lately? And we're not talking about the delivery of some sprint on Friday. And I think it's important we work with people, and, you know, thinking of other people's perspective is one component. I think the other is there's a lot of small techniques. I was CTO at a company that was not remote. We went to hybrid. This is way pre-pandemic. And we put up stand-up sites in the office because we basically had our remote folks, which weren't many, and then we grew that. And they would be on Zoom and they would have a really terrible experience. So we invested in speakers in the conference rooms and big TVs with cameras. So they would be a very good experience. This is all pre-pandemic. And then we had stand-up setups, so we could do stand-up, and then we would have on Zoom the 3 people that were part of that team, but they would get a first-class experience, but everyone else could still do stand-up. So I think there's a lot of small things of that nature that you can set up to build great experiences, and really don't make people have a second-class experience. Make everyone have be part of it either way. And if that's also works in the reverse, if most of your team is remote and very few are not, it can cut the other way as well. And I think the other component is, for example, onboarding, being deliberate, give someone onboarding mentors, sometimes cultural onboarding mentors, multiple people that are responsible for different aspects. Some can be technical onboarding, some can just be like socializing, being deliberate about those things. Asana does those, but I've seen other companies do it as well. And one of the things that's not super necessary, but I've done a lot of different setups in companies, and when I join, and I advise others when they're new, I give them advice when they've joined us during the pandemic, because I've done this way pre-pandemic, is I meet a lot of people that I have no work to do with. And I'm like, you're another manager in my group. You're another leader in my group. You're a designer. I have nothing to do with you per se in the sprint, in the month of deliverables, and just meet people. And sometimes people find it a little weird to set up a meeting just to chat and say hello over Zoom, but I would argue in some ways it's not too different than coffee for someone that you've not met. And I think there's a greater importance for that because people aren't used to doing it in Zoom. They are used to doing it in an office. And you have to realize those things still need to occur. And so you have to maybe be more deliberate.